Robyn Keating is a 26-year-old transgender woman. Born into a male body, she knew from an early age that she didn't identify with boys, but did identify with girls. While her mother, Dina, was always supportive of her child being whoever she felt herself to be, growing up, Robyn was afraid of her father, whom she describes as hyper-macho and who once called his then son a faggot. So she remained in the closet for years, until one autumn day in 2017, at the age of 23, she told her mother she was transgender. From there, mother and daughter began a journey together. Today, Robyn thinks of her mother as, quote, my best friend. And while Robyn's journey has had some rough patches, her mom continues to be a source of love and support to her. In this interview with PFLAG's Rick Koonce, Robyn explains the differences between sexual orientation and gender identity. Human sexuality is complex, she says, more so than is reflected in the social constructs of male and female, masculine and feminine. Robyn also describes her everyday life today as a trans woman, her gender transition during her days in law school, the challenges of navigating a world that treats sexuality as binary, dating as a trans person during the pandemic, and her new career as a young attorney on Cape Cod. Robyn, it's great to be with you today, and I think your story is a very interesting one. You came out as a trans woman just a few years ago, 2017, I believe, but can you talk a little bit about when you had the first indications or signs that you were transgender?
Yeah, so I came out in 2017 when I was 23 years old. I'm 26 years old now. I would say that the first time that I ever kind of had the realization that something was different was probably, I would probably say when I was about 8 years old. And I think that's just because my sister was getting like a bunch of like the American Girl dolls and like other Beanie Boppers, other little dolls that I, gravitated towards playing with more so than playing with, traditionally boys' toys. And, I would I asked my mom, could I get a doll? And she's like, well, no, but you can play with your sister's dolls. And I'm like, okay, well, that's good enough. And I remember my mom, she actually, she talked to my teacher because I really had a fascination with the American Girl doll historical books. And she talked to my teacher and she's like, is this normal, for my son at the time to be, so interested in these American Girl doll books? And my teacher's like, well, yeah, they're a good source of learning about history. So, my mom kind of shrugged it off. So I would say it was around when I was 8 or 9 that I first kind of had that realization that I was different.
And you probably didn't have the vocabulary to express what you were actually feeling. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's pretty fair to say. I didn't really know what transgender was when I was a kid. There wasn't the amount of resources and stuff like that on the internet or in other literature. And it's certainly not something that I had ever seen in my real life. So for me, I couldn't really put a word on how I was feeling. And it wasn't until I was around 15 when I was in driver's ed and actually learned about another transgender girl that I ever, really knew that was a possibility. And that was a thing that a person could be. It just didn't, when I was a kid, I was just kind of well, I like these things, but, I'm a boy. I was born a boy. So I just have to, I kind of have to deal with it. And I didn't really know that there was, I guess, an option, although I don't really think it's an option. Well, I would say to transition is an option, but it's not really an option to be transgender, because for me, that's just something that I was born with, and it's not something that I can change. It's just an immutable characteristic that I've, lived my entire life dealing with.
I know that for many transgender youth, there is not a supportive parent or family system around them. I know in your case, your mom was very important to you growing up, and you've described her, I think, to me as your best friend. How was your mom helpful to you, or what were the challenges, even with her, in terms of taking this journey of awareness together?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, I definitely felt like my mom would basically be supportive with whatever decisions and choices that I made in my life. She would always say that I'll support you as long as you don't kill anyone. And I'm like, well, I don't really plan on doing that anytime soon. But my father, I was a bit afraid of. He was more conservative. He would watch Fox News, listen to Howie Carr on like Sirius XM in the truck. He had a big truck. He had a Corvette. He worked as a mechanic and then later as a carpenter. So, very, male oriented career paths. And I just felt always almost scared of him because he would even say like, why are you acting like such a faggot or being acting like such a fag if I was playing with like my sister's dolls, which is not really a good indication that someone is going to be supportive if you ever actually do come out to them. So I was definitely afraid of my father's reaction to it. And I think that it definitely kind of kept me in the closet throughout my teenage years. And when I was 18, my parents got divorced. And that's kind of like the first time that I felt a little bit more kind of able to talk to my mom about stuff because she wasn't, inextricably intertwined is a term that they use in law. She wasn't inextricably intertwined with my father anymore. So, I think I was 19 when I first kind of mentioned that I felt different. And she was like, well, are you gay? And I'm like, well, not really. And I didn't really know. And then I just felt uncomfortable. So I just kind of like backtracked on it. And I was like, no, I just like to, wear women's clothes sometimes. It's not anything like actually wanting to be a woman. That's not really what it is. And she's like, oh, well, okay, whatever. She didn't really seem fazed by that. So yeah, definitely. I felt like my mom, I have always felt like she would be supportive, but my father was a little bit different. And I was just afraid. But once he was kind of not really in my life, because after my parents got divorced, I wasn't really close to him. And then he ended up passing away a few years after that. So I think him not being right there as like an influence that was kind of scaring me into the closet definitely made an impact on me coming out to my mom and the rest of my family.
Hmm. And during this time, so you were sort of, as you say, maybe a little bit in and then in the closet, then back out. And how were you sort of thinking about what you were feeling? Did you go online to identify resources, or did you just sort of marinate in your own thoughts during this period before you shared in depth with your mom?
Yeah, so I definitely went online. I went to a site called Reddit, and they have like different forums there, and they have some like they're called subreddits, which is like sub forums, and there was some about LGBT people and some about like trans people and trans women. So I would like read some of the stories and experiences and posts that some people would post there. I would sometimes watch like videos on YouTube of other trans women that had like already come out and their experiences and stuff like that. But, by and large, I didn't really like reach out to other people. I was more just browsing these things. And just kind of, other than that, it was just kind of marinating in my own head this entire time.
I know that your mom told me the story about how you kind of shared the news one day while the two of you were cutting her grass. Can you describe that scene?
Yeah, so I actually think I had, and I was discussing this with her this morning because I was staying with her. I think that actually I came out to her for like a second time a couple days before that over a telephone call. But then, I had come down for the weekend. I was living up in Abington at the time, and I came down to her place in Yarmouth. And I talked to her, and we were cutting the grass, and she was just kind of asking me, well, how, is this what you really feel like? How do you feel? And I remember she's like, so like, do you want to be called a different name? Like, you don't want to be Robert anymore? And I'm like, well, no. And she's like, okay, well, what name are you thinking of? And I'm like, well, I think I should be called Brianna. And she said, no. She said, I don't like that name. She's like, could you at least be called Robyn? Because that was the name I was going to name you if you were, if I was assigned female at birth. And I'm like, sure, I guess. So I guess it's kind of like a compromise. But I mean, I don't really put too much stock into names. Names for me are just a way to identify a person. kind of like refer to them other than just pointing at them and saying you. So a name is not really as big of a deal to me, although I definitely wanted to not have my birth name or dead name or whatever you want to call it, which was, Robert James, a very stereotypically masculine name named after both of my grandfathers. So I didn't want to, I didn't want to retain that masculine name going forward just because I didn't identify as a masculine person. So I'd rather have a more feminine name, which is why I changed my name to Robyn Jessica now.
Interesting, interesting. And, as we talk here, Robyn, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that people have about people who are transgender?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about people that are transgender are that a lot of people get gender identity and sexual orientation confused. For me, that was actually one of the biggest issues growing up is that, I would occasionally have my sister or my mom or my dad or someone else, basically ask me point blank if I was, gay or homosexual. And I would say, well, I don't really, I'm not interested in guys though. So it was confusing for me, and I think this is what a lot of people think is that trans women are essentially just extremely effeminate gay men and trans men are just extremely masculine butch women. And for me, that wasn't really the case, right? Because I am, and I still, even after transitioning, I am still, solely attracted to women. So I think that was the biggest issue is that I didn't really understand that gender identity and sexual orientation were two separate things, and that it was possible to be feeling like me and identify as a woman or a trans feminine person while still being attracted to women. I mean, that I knew that lesbians, when I was a teenager, I knew that lesbians were a thing, but it didn't, for some reason it didn't really compute to me that that a trans woman could be attracted to women, and that could be, okay. So for me, that was a little bit difficult, and it didn't help that my first kind of the first couple trans women that I knew of were straight trans women that were interested in men and had previously, before transitioning, lived their lives as gay men. So for me, that was just a little bit concerning, and I think that that was one of the things that kind of delayed myself coming to the real realization that I'm different, and I'm different because I'm a trans woman and I like women, so I'm a lesbian trans woman. I mean, I knew I was different, but I didn't really know the right, the right terminology for it, or that you could be a trans woman that was also a lesbian, or a trans man that was also a gay man. I just didn't understand that gender identity and sexual orientation were kind of distinct concepts and they weren't necessarily tied to each other.
I think that was wonderfully said, and it really points up how complex and nuanced human sexuality really is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I think that, everyone is kind of different. I think that sexuality is a spectrum. I think that there's some people, even people that consider themselves straight, might occasionally have feelings for the other or the same gender. So I think sexuality is a spectrum, and I think it's important to realize that it's not really related to gender identity. I remember actually reading an article, and they had actually polled some trans women, and I think that it was about 25% identified solely as being attracted to females or feminine people. About 25% describe themselves as being attracted to only males or like masculine people. About 10% identified themselves as being asexual, so they don't really have any sexual feelings, although they might have romantic feelings. And then about 40% identified themselves as bisexual or pansexual, which means they have feelings for either masculine and feminine people, or they have feelings for basically all different gender identities. So I think that's kind of interesting, and that's kind of also similar for trans men. It's definitely a spectrum in terms of what kinds of people that transgender people find either sexual and or romantic attraction to.
So here's a question I'm really curious to know your perspective on. So you were born into a male body
Mm-hmm.
and have transitioned to being female. What do the notions of masculinity and femininity mean to you, if anything?
Yeah, so for me, I think that my dysphoria, and dysphoria is kind of a term that means like the unease in one's body. I think that my dysphoria was more physical dysphoria. It wasn't as much social dysphoria because I think that a lot of social constructs are kind of arbitrary and weak. Like, there's no real reason why boys should play with cars and grow up to be mechanics, or that girls should, play with dolls and grow up to be hairstylists. And I think that, that's kind of evident when you look at, well, there's a hairstylist, which is, or like someone that works at a salon, which is like a stereotypically feminine kind of occupation. But then you have a barber who works at a barbershop, and that's a masculine occupation. But at the end of the day, both of those occupations cut hair. So it's kind of silly why they're drawing arbitrary lines between masculinity and femininity, even when they're doing the same thing. Recently, I purchased an electric bike, an e-bike. And if you've never ridden an e-bike, they're actually very fun. It can go up to 28 miles an hour with pedal assist, and it's also very quiet, which is why I like it versus a traditional motorbike. But when I was looking at the e-bike on their website, I was looking, and they had a little bar, and it had like a drop down, and it said bikes for men and bikes for women. So I'm like, well, that's funny. Like, what's the difference? So I click on the link. I look at bikes for men. I'm like, okay, I see the options. Click on the other link, bikes for women. I look down, same exact options, different colors. And I'm like, so you're getting the same exact bike, but one of them is black and the other one is light green. So what is the real difference, right? It just seems like society at many times just draws arbitrary lines and says one thing is masculine and one thing is feminine. So for me, I think it was definitely more of like, I didn't like what my physical body looks like so it was more physical dysphoria rather than social dysphoria. Like, I didn't like having like hair on my face or on my chest, and I didn't like having broad shoulders, and I didn't like having coarse skin. I didn't like having narrow hips, and I felt like I should be a person that has breasts, and I didn't have breasts and stuff like that. So I felt like for me, it was more of a physical dysphoria rather than a social dysphoria, and I think that's in part because I think that social constructs are kind of arbitrary, and I mean, they're social constructs. They're created by society. So of course they're arbitrary.
Interesting perspective. And well, if I may go back for a minute to sort of the social dimensions of being transgender, and you were telling me that you actually have put yourself out there on some of the dating sites, right?
Yeah. So if any ladies are in the area between the ages of 22 and 36, I am single and ready to mingle. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I have kind of had my first foray into the dating world throughout like my adolescence and into college. I was just extremely uncomfortable with really looking for a date. I've really never been on a date in my entire life. I didn't go to prom. I didn't, do a lot of that stuff. I was really absorbed into one, video games, which I played a lot of video games, and two, just my schoolwork, right? I would always, kind of cast any aspersions of families saying, "Oh, do you have anyone yet?" And I'll be like, "Oh, no, I'm too busy with school and stuff like that." And I mean, that was kind of true, but it was definitely just an extreme feel of uncomfortableness until I kind of came out to myself. And then that kind of opened the door for me to finally like actually try to pursue looking for a relationship. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised that I have actually used some applications that do have options to identify yourself as a wide variety of gender identities, and also find like a wide variety of gender and gender identities that you're attracted to. So I think that's been really helpful because like I'm of the school where, and I know that not all trans people are of the school, but I'm of the school where I think you should kind of like be like really open and honest about your transgender identity, like right up front when you're going to date someone. I wouldn't want to go into like a date without someone like knowing beforehand a little bit about my past. And I know that not everyone is the same, but I'm kind of the opinion of if you're going to get intimate with someone, it shouldn't really, you should kind of be like upfront and honest with them like right away, because it's kind of probably going to come up, sooner or later, especially if someone's obviously pre-op, if they haven't had sexual reassignment surgery. So, if a trans woman still has a penis, it's going to become very obvious when they don't have clothes on that they were not assigned female at birth, or, vice versa for a trans man having a vagina if they have not had a phalloplasty yet.
Yes, yes. And you said something a moment ago, Robyn, that is staying with me. You talked about this notion of coming out to yourself. And we were talking earlier about the fact that when you were very young, neither you nor your mom had maybe the vocabulary to talk about what was really going on with you. From your perspective now, what's your advice to other young people who may be questioning their gender identity, but don't know where to look, don't even know how to ask questions or inquire within themselves? What's your advice to them?
I definitely would advise, especially like younger people and people that are kind of still reliant on their family for both emotional as well as like financial support, and especially like people that live at home still. I would definitely advise that you kind of test the waters and kind of see how people are going to react, kind of like gauge their reactions to like other LGBT people, in the news, whether they be celebrities or other news stories, and kind of gauge their reaction. But I would caution that I feel that if it's someone very close to you, sometimes reactions can be different, and that can kind of actually cut both ways. Like, even if they seem to be like, oh, well, that's fine, good for them. It's different if like a child or a sibling or a niece or a nephew or a parent or an uncle or an aunt or, someone in your family comes out. It's just different because you have a different connection to them than you do a random stranger in the news. So I definitely feel like one thing you have to do is to kind of like test out the waters and make your determination as to whether or not someone is going to be, supportive of you. I also think it's important to have kind of like an alternate support network, whether that be with, maybe distant relatives like cousins or something like that, or friends or someone like that. So you definitely like, if your immediate family doesn't accept you, you kind of have like a backup plan, a place to crash and get back up on your feet, like some other kind of support network. I also think it's important to definitely get a therapist when you're kind of like working through these issues. That helped me a lot, talking to a therapist and talking about like what was really going on. And I think that therapy in general is just really powerful, and really it's really important for people to be able to talk to someone. And the great thing about therapy is that they are bound by confidentiality, so you can have comfort in knowing that whatever you're saying to them, with limited exceptions, is going to be really kept close and is not going to be disclosed to other people. So you're really more free to like express what you're actually feeling, versus if you're just talking to a friend. Well, if your friend decides that, you know what, I think this is shocking or whatever, then they can just disclose it to other people. I think that makes therapy really powerful, is that they have that privilege that they don't have to disclose things to others.
I think mentioning therapy is wonderful. And I remember a good therapist friend of mine saying to me that one of the goals of therapy is to invite people to unpack their bags and to stay a while. And I think it seems to me that that's very good advice to anybody of any age who might be exploring their gender identity where they go. Now, you're a successful attorney. You decided, as I understand it, to go through with your transition while you were in law school. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm an attorney. I finished law school about a year ago and I passed the bar. Well,
Congratulations.
thank you. Whether or not I'm successful, I think time will tell, but so far I have not been disbarred for misconduct, so that's always a good thing. So, yeah, so law school is a 3-year program, and law school was really the first time that I moved away from living with my mom. I had briefly, like for like one semester, been basically living at college when I was in college, and I just didn't feel comfortable with like living in a dorm. Me and my roommate had different schedules, so I actually ended up commuting. And my mom was, I was living with my mom on the Cape in Yarmouth, and I was commuting up to Boston University, which is up in Boston. So that was a bit of a long commute, but I really just could not take that kind of communal setting in the dorm. I couldn't deal with it. So I actually did commute throughout my undergraduate experience. So when I went to law school, that was really the first time that I was ever truly on my own, moving into like my own apartment in Abington, which is a bit closer to Boston. So my commute to Northeastern, which is where I went to law school, was a lot shorter than it was going up from the Cape to BU. So this is the first real time that I had like my own apartment and my own place to live, my own space, etc. So it definitely gave me the opportunity to experiment more. I purchased some traditionally female outfits online, and I had them shipped to my apartment, and I started dressing more and more as a woman while I was at my apartment. I bought makeup, I bought nail polish, stuff like that. And I started like more presenting just in my own apartment more as myself. And I think that definitely kind of made me feel like it kind of like confirmed for me that this is something that I really want to do going forward. And I think that I went to law school at Northeastern. Northeastern. What are they called? The queerest law school in the country or something like that. So it definitely was like a supportive environment for me to start to present more feminine and such. And it was during my second year of law school that I actually came out to my mom as transgender and started going to therapy, and then would eventually start hormones during the spring of my second year of law school. And I didn't change any of my documents or change like my presentation that much at law school. Like I'd wear like skinny jeans and stuff like that, but nothing like I wouldn't wear like dresses or anything to law school. So it wasn't really until I was actually finishing up with law school and in my last internship during my third year of law school that I actually started really changing the way like I presented in public. In private, I would obviously, in like outside of school, I present more feminine, but in school, I didn't really change my presentation. And I think that was just because I felt like I needed some time just to process things, and I needed some time for, I guess, hormones to kind of like work, soften up my features a little bit, and just time to get like more confidence with like going out in public. I definitely took like baby steps. Like I wasn't someone that all of a sudden one day, put on a pink dress and, a face full of makeup and, 3-inch heels and just walked out to like face the world. It was definitely more gradual of me, like starting with like skinny jeans and like women cut t-shirts and jackets and stuff like that. Like not really, not really hyper feminine. And I mean, even now I'm not really a hyper feminine person. I'm more like a tomboyish kind of woman. So, but I mean, I think, different things work for different people. I think some people can kind of really jump into it like right away. But for me, I definitely felt more comfortable and just kind of like taking baby steps in the way that I presented in public.
Robyn, you strike me as so resilient and so resourceful and really courageous to have done this and to have done it with support from your mom, but you did this largely, if not essentially, all on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just really, really motivated. I remember the first time that I went to my endocrinologist at Boston Medical Center in Boston, and it was a straight up blizzard. Like, trains were being canceled, nothing was open, and I was like trekking through the sidewalk in Boston, and it was like a 2 mile walk from the nearest T stop to get to Boston Medical Center. I didn't really know the bus routes well, and they'd canceled most of the buses, so I didn't really want to mess around with that. But I'm like, oh, I can just walk there. I have my snow boots on. I literally trekked through a blizzard for like 2.5 miles to get to the medical center. And like, I was the only one there. She's like, they called me while I was on my way and they're like, are you coming in? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make it. So I felt like I had just gotten to the North Pole by the time I got there. So that was like, I was definitely like supremely motivated to do something about it because I knew that I couldn't live my life basically living a lie and not really expressing who I really was any longer. So I definitely felt like it was something that I really had to do in order to like, be happy with myself.
And to that point, when you began to transition to take the hormones, did you notice a shift emotionally inside you?
I noticed that I was much calmer, especially for the first, like after I came out, before I started hormones, every day I would just think like, oh my God, my body is like just getting further, masculine, right? I was 23 at the time, so puberty was essentially over. But I mean, testosterone is still affecting your body. I think one of the big things that really pushed me to come out was I noticed my hairline start to creep back and my temples started to get really thin. And I'm like, oh God, I'm going bald. And that was like one of my like biggest fears growing up was going bald because obviously significantly more men experience pattern hair loss than do women. So I associated going bald with masculinity, right? So I was like super concerned. I saw my hairline going back and I'm like, oh my God, I need to do something about it now, or else I'm going to have to wear wigs for like my entire life when I come out. And, I didn't want to do that. I'd rather like just be able to like use my natural like hair. So I think that was one of the things that I was really, that like really helped push me at that time to come out was just like the risk of further masculinizing. So when I started using the female hormones, my immediate kind of feeling was now I'm no longer going in that wrong direction. Now I'm going to start going in the right direction, going in the direction I should have been going in, all along. It's kind of like when you get lost, you take a wrong turn, you ask for direction. Someone says, oh, well, now you can turn around and head back the other way, right? On one level, you're like, pissed off because you're like, well, I just wasted all that time going the wrong direction. But on the other level, you're like, okay, well, this is good. Now I don't have that feeling of being lost. I know what direction to go in, and I'm going to get there eventually.
You're following your North Star. And I'm kind of curious, when someone begins the transition to being female and takes the hormones for that, does that in fact reverse hair loss? Will you now grow a full head of hair if you want it?
So for me, it's stopped any additional hair loss, although my hairline is still not exactly where I'd want it to be. I'd say that I probably recovered about 2 years of hair loss. So like my hairline is about where it was when I was about 21, which is it's okay depending on like how I part my hair. Like if I pull my hair straight back, it's more noticeable that I have like a more stereotypically masculine hairline. It's like an M-shaped hairline with like the temples being about an inch further back than the rest of the hair. But I think it definitely has helped me a lot, although, your mileage may vary. In general, people say that you can expect your hair loss if it's related to your DHT levels, which is, a function of your testosterone levels. If it's related to your DHT levels, then it'll essentially stop. But regrowth of hair is really dependent. Like if someone comes out at 50 and they've basically been slick bald since they were 30, it's highly unlikely that they're going to have any kind of significant hair regrowth on top. I've also heard that it's better if it works better with regrowing hair if you have a bald spot in the back of your head. Now, this is anecdotal. I didn't notice like the back of my like I didn't notice getting my hair wasn't thinning at the crown of my head. My hairline was just kind of like receding at my temples. But I have heard that it is more effective at regrowing hair if your hair loss is starting at the crown versus if it's starting at the temples. I have no idea about the science behind that. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, but so take it with some salt. But that's what I've heard is that it does essentially stop any further hair loss, and kind of any hair regrowth is your mileage may vary kind of situation.
Got it. Got it. So you're 3 years in now,
About,
essentially.
yeah.
And any ongoing challenges with adjusting to being of this gender?
Not really. I mean, people still, especially like over the phone, they still misgender me because I haven't really done a whole lot of voice training, and I don't really feel like I should have to. I don't like that my voice is so deep, but I also don't want to basically be putting on a falsetto for my entire life because that's just not really what I sound like. So I guess I speak a little bit softer, although even like listening to recordings of myself a few years ago, I more or less sound the same. And so over the phone, and especially because my name's Robyn, right? It could be it's a unisex name. It could be a male or a female name. So over the phone, people call me sir and mister and stuff like that. So, does it bother me? I mean, a little bit, but I'm not going to like, make a hissy fit over it. It's kind of whatever because they can't see me. But yeah, I mean, it's probably like 70-30 that people gender me as female or male. And I think it depends a lot on what I'm wearing. And that is kind of one of the things that bothers me. Like if I'm like wearing like a dress and heels and like makeup and stuff like that, people are obviously more likely to, gender me feminine. But like today, I'm just wearing shorts and a t-shirt, don't really have a whole lot of makeup on. I'm wearing like sneakers, right? Like if I'm dressed like this, which like I'm comfortable in, like, I mean, they are technically women's clothes, although whatever that means. But I mean, they're women's cut clothes and stuff like that. But people are more likely just to gender me male because I'm wearing more like androgynous unisex clothes, and they're just like not sure, especially when I open my mouth and I sound more masculine. So I think it really depends on how people perceive me. And that's one of the things that bothers me, I guess, with being trans is that I don't look so feminine that I can wear like kind of like more masculine clothes and still be gendered female. Like that would be my ideal, is if I could roll out of bed and be wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt and having people still gender me female versus people look at me and they're like, I'm not sure, but you sound like a guy, so I'm just going to say you're male, right? So I would definitely like if I could wear more androgynous clothes because, like, I mean, I'm more of like I said, a tomboyish type person with my presentation most of the time. I do wear dresses occasionally to work and for like special occasions, but a lot of the times, like in my free time, I'm wearing like jeans and t-shirts, and I just wish that like I looked more feminine so that people would see me as a female, even where I'm just wearing jeans and a t-shirt and not that much makeup.
Wonderful stories and reflections. Just a couple of other questions, Robyn. At one point in this whole transition, this journey, your mom discovered PFLAG, and I know that it's been very important to her as a support system. I know that both you and she attend some of our online meetings. What do you think is the value of an organization like PFLAG for either the parents and family members of somebody who's transgender or for a transgender person themselves?
So I guess I'll start with the parent perspective or the family member perspective. I know for my mom, it was just really helpful finding people that had kind of gone through the same thing and like how they had kind of dealt with it, and that just like reassurance that everything's going to be okay. Because when I first came out to her, she's like, I love you no matter what, and I'll support you. But she said, like, I'm really scared for you. Like, I'm scared that you're going to get like physically harmed, or that you're not going to be able to, be successful as an attorney or whatever. Like I decided to be. She's like, I feel like you're just going to like be discriminated against, stuff like that. Which, I mean, for me, it hasn't personally happened a whole lot, but that might just be a product of living in a more liberal area. But that was like my mom's biggest concern, was like I was going to get like physically assaulted by someone. So I think going to PFLAG and like hearing other people's stories, especially like positive stories, like really helped her kind of understand it more. When I first went to PFLAG, which was I think about 4 months after my mother had initially started going to PFLAG, I just liked kind of having a sense of community because I hadn't really put myself out there in real life. I've been in various like online spaces. As I said earlier, I was like browsing on Reddit and on YouTube and just watching other people, but I never really like interacted with other like trans people before. So it kind of gave me like a sense of community, and it really, I like that it helped my mom a lot, and also that I like attending the meetings so that I can be a resource to other people and help other people understand like what it's like to be trans or have a trans kid, and like kind of like I guess dissuade any kind of negative expectations about it. Because I think that while there is discrimination against trans people, I think that at least my mom was like overly worried. Like she felt like me going to Stop and Shop, I was just going to get like assaulted and stuff. And so far that hasn't happened yet. So that's good.
Well, I certainly enjoy seeing both you and your mom on our virtual calls these days. And I think your perspective and that of your mom's are wonderful and very enriching to others. So here's a final question, and it's this. And again, based on your experience and what you've maybe seen, what's your advice to people of any age who are wrestling with gender identity about how to practice good self-care as they explore the feelings that they have within themselves?
So I definitely think it's important for everyone to have good self-care, and whether that be, including but not limited to getting enough sleep every night. I think sleep's super important. Eating a healthy, balanced diet, getting regular meals, making sure you have breakfast, taking a shower, brushing your teeth, flossing your teeth, putting moisturizer on your feet, whatever it is, right? I think it's important for everyone to have good self-care. But I think something that especially LGBT people need to have is they need to either have a support system that they know is available to them, or go out and like make your own support system, especially if you're planning on coming out in the near future. It's like somewhere safe that you can like kind of like vent and talk to people about any like issues, emotional issues, interpersonal issues, whatever kind of issues you're having that can like be kind of your rock, I think is really important. Like I talked about earlier, I think seeking out a therapist is really important. And, also definitely having, I think, a medical doctor and like other people that are able to like have like regular checkups on you and be able to get you like referrals and be like other, provide resources for you is also really important. And it's also important just for your general health to be under the regular care of a medical professional, provide like care for you, and, make sure you're healthy. I think, health is the most important thing in life. If you don't have, if you don't have your health, then what do you really have?
Very nicely put. And Robyn, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me, Rick.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.